The idea of Fury, Joshua coming together to settle the score for all belts for an undisputed title shot, heavyweight championships on the line is it's just too delicious to not discuss.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. Not next. I don't care how long this quarantine lasts. It's not going to happen. Michelle, you know as well as anybody, like you can run down just how much have you seen over this past week of discussions, like real negotiations being discussed of a fight that just, it can't happen.
It's interesting because the first thing I thought when I read that, like all the news articles was like, wait a minute, how? Like, we have contracts in place. I understand that the contracts that were once signed are no longer valid because the date is different, but it doesn't mean it changes with who the mandatory is. It doesn't change the automatic rematch clause that is in place. I do not, under any circumstances, see Deontay Wilder stepping aside for any fee, especially after Eddie said something along the lines of it would be embarrassing if Wilder did step aside. So it's almost like you're almost egging him on even more, like, well, I'm definitely not stepping aside if that's what you're going to go off saying. So I think it's fun news topics. I think it's fun to talk about the what ifs right now. But the realistic, or being realistic about this, it's not happening. It's not happening. How are we even saying negotiations when they they can't get past the opponents that they have under contract? It's not happening. Will, and it's funny because I have to read this real quick. Eddie Hearn said that he stressed the tentative nature of the discussions, but confirmed to ESPN, we're talking to MTK about where the fight would take place. At the moment, the main focus for everybody the contractual situations, aka the guys they're supposed to fight next, right? The conversations between myself and MTK are that we've had an approach. The only discussions at the moment are where the fight would take place, and we don't even know when this fight could take place. We're certainly open to having discussions about the possibility of this happening this year or next year. So who done messed up and started reporting that it could be next? Because according to what Eddie said, he's basically saying we're having a conversation about the possibility of a unification fight that may not happen next.
Yeah, you have actually piqued my curiosity about one element of the story, which I hadn't considered, to your credit. Are the contracts they sign relative to a timeline? Because a good lawyer could worm his way into the wording of something like that and maybe find some room for negotiation. Because one thing I'm certain of, Tyson Fury is not afraid of a third fight with Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder is definitely not afraid of a third fight with Tyson Fury. But that said, if Tyson Fury could get out of that third fight legally, get out of that contractual obligation, and have a unification undisputed fight in the UK or even Saudi Arabia, I would be hard-pressed to believe he wouldn't take that option, no matter what's been said. The question for me is, how do you get it? Pulev is probably the easier of the two to get to step aside just because he's with Arum. He could have a fight shot down the line. He'd probably pay him a lot more money to not fight than to fight. I could see that negotiation, like some bones for that to happen. But Deontay Wilder, what would it take? Like,
he's doing it.
What would it take? Look, they say everybody's got a price, right? Which can be insulting to a guy who fights on integrity. But for the sake of discussion, let's say everybody does have a price. There's got to be a number you could reach or a situation that you could put forward that would make at least Wilder start to think about it.
This is exactly what Eddie Hearn was talking about when he's saying negotiations. What they're trying to do is they're trying to see how much money the Saudis are going to bring to the table. Now, I don't know, given the current circumstances of the pandemic, we all know the oil is basically the oil companies are not making any money at all. So I'm curious to know, not saying they're not already like trillionaires, obviously billionaires, but
I think they saved a bit for a rainy day.
My point is, it has to make sense, doesn't it? And if they can't have it in front of a live audience, not that it's too big of a deal, because we all know the last time we went to Saudi, it wasn't the biggest crowd. But I just don't know how much money they'll be willing to fork out for a fight where a big chunk of that money will have to be placed aside for a step-aside fee to try to dangle the carrot in front of both of the opponents to say, well, if I gave you this much money, would you take it? What about this much money? Would you take that? They're going to keep playing with the number because they're going to have a budget in their head. And I think that's sort of what they're waiting on and hoping they can bank on the fact that Wilder will want to step aside just for a few more months before, and maybe he gets guaranteed the winner of that fight. Although we both know that's not going to happen because we have Dillian Whyte, who apparently is locked into that February date, according to Mauricio Solomon, and they will not budge. He has to, whoever has the WBC title come February-ish will have to fight Dillian Whyte before any other fight takes place.
The only person in this entire conversation that I am certain 100% without a doubt is willing to budge on his promise is Mauricio Suleiman. If it's Dillian Whyte who's next, we'll just be like, 2022. How about that? 2022. This guy has been willing to push Dillian Whyte.
That's the argument, though. Listen, if the argument is, if we did have Joshua Fury next, right?
Yeah.
And whoever the winner is out of that fight will have to fight Dillian Whyte next. Deontay Wilder won't be stepping aside for one fight. He'll be stepping aside for two fights before he gets to fight the WBC champion again. So is it worth it to him? No, it's not going to happen. No, we are dreaming. We are wishful thinking. It's not going to happen. Deontay Wilder will not step aside. End of conversation. That's my true belief in it.
I agree. That's my belief because I don't think that they're going to put something in front of him that is going to be worth more to him than a shot at his title again, first up.
But Rahim, if you're looking at it from the perspective of we may not have open crowds for a while, right? They want Joshua Fury in front of an open crowd. So I know that's why they're considering having the fights in various countries that have like less social distancing restrictions and are open to having crowds. That's not a guarantee that we're going to have that by, unfortunately, by this winter. So they want to hold that fight off. So is it happening next? No. If we're talking about keeping busy here, we're probably going to have Wilder Fury behind closed doors before we have Joshua Fury behind closed doors.
Okay, all of that's fair, but I would say that the amount of value of an all-English, undisputed heavyweight championship is so great that if you had to sacrifice an in-person crowd to get that fight on, you would 100% do it. Especially if you could do it next, because there's going to be such a hunger for anything. Something that huge would be a great way for boxing to reintroduce itself post-pandemic. One more point on this. And your point's well taken. I know we started this by saying how wildly unlikely it is. But let's remember that Wilder just had bicep surgery. He did not perform well in the most recent fight. He's openly discussing changing his team. It looks to me like Tyson Fury has battled his demons successfully and is continuing to train. He seems in good spirits. He seems like he's going to come out of quarantine ready to fight. Yeah. And it might be like, this is something Wilder would never say, but if I was on his team or in his ear, I would have to consider it might be in your best interest to drive the price up, get as good a deal as you can, as many promises as you can in writing, and maybe do that step aside, get prepared with whoever this new team is, test that bicep, heal up, change your approach, see what Fury, Joshua ends up being. You might get Fury out of the way without beating him again. And like I said at the very first broadcast, I'm as interested in Joshua Wilder today as I was when both of those fighters were undefeated. I still want to see that fight. I still think that there is a lot to be learned from those two guys facing each other. And if Joshua somehow beats Fury, Wilder could have an in around to all the belts as opposed to just fighting to reclaim his one. But I'm going to put one question to the fans. If you're Wilder, what would it take? Don't give me what would it take for you to take the criticism, to lose a shot at your title, to maybe never get another one? What would they have to put on the table?
Do you know what I think? I think if we're gonna play with the little numbers, and if you're asking, so I'm just gonna guess. My guess is if he's going to take a step aside fee, and perhaps his team is suggesting like maybe the injury isn't completely healed, I would say it's going to take the same amount of money that he would have made in a fight to begin with.
Yeah. Well, okay, the same amount of money he would make to fight Fury?
Yes.
I think they can probably come up with that money. They especially, we get this Saudi oil money, we get all the licensing.
Guarantee in the contract, Mauricio Solomon signs too. It would have to be that he gets the winner of that fight immediately following. No exceptions. But then again, you got to get the mandatories who everybody's got to agree. And I just don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening for all parties. It's like one fight's one thing, but it trickles down into multiple. So it's like you're really waiting a lot longer. You're waiting an additional year, if not longer, before you get your shot. So I just don't see maybe Pulev, because maybe if they can give Pulev a pretty nice chunk of change that he's never made before, I can understand that, but I just don't see it happening with Wilder. I'm still going to stand.
I say I'm Wilder. I want a third of the purse. I want the favorite nation. Joshua, Fury, Wilder. Everybody makes the same money. You want me to step aside? I'm taking thirdsies with everybody. And that's not all. I want to be the co-main event fight facing Mike Tyson.
Hey, Eddie, remember when they were doing the negotiations for Joshua Wilder? Eddie didn't even want to give him like a certain percentage for the fight initially, and now we're expecting that no flipping way in hell.
Michelle,
no.
One of the last interviews I had with Eddie Hearn, he offered before the rematch of Fury.
Can I retract the word? I mean like the initial offer, not the last offer, but the initial offer when they're first talking about making that fight. That's what I want to clarify.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. All I'm saying is times they are changing, and the situation is so unique. I'm not saying they would do it. I'm saying that's how I'm coming to the table. Thirdsies.
All right. We'll leave it to the fans to tell us. If you can leave it in the comments, we will give you a shout. We just need you to tell us whether or not, what amount you think it would take for Deontay Wilder to step aside to allow the mega fight between Joshua and Fury happen in Saudi Arabia. Let's move on.